7th Annual Audio Authors Expo. My name is Keith Carreiro. I'm the moderator for this panel. The panel title is So You Want to Create a World? You Take the Blue Pill or the Red Pill. We have some excellent panel members here. And if you can, we've got D.R., Paul, and Angelina. So you guys want to introduce yourselves? D.R.?
Me? Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'm D.R., Harry, and not a doctor. So the books that I write are all speculative fiction. Most of them are set in Rhode Island, some a little bit outside Massachusetts mostly. And it's all usually about supernatural creatures kind of trying to deal with being that and still dealing with the human side of things. I have a little slogan on my banner out there, and it says, real characters, fantastic worlds. So I really just try to make the characters feel like real people, even though they're in these circumstances or maybe have these powers that aren't human.
My name is Paul Magnan. I write dark fantasy and horror. I write 2 books here. Q the Unknown, book 1, The Coming of This, and book 2, The Oracle of Xerox Isle, which is basically set on a land that's literally surrounded by hell. Just think of Dante's Inferno and Milton's Paradise Lost Going Wild. And they are going to be reissued early in 2020. And I also have a collection of horror short stories that's titled Veer from the Straight and Narrow. Some have been previously published in various magazines, and others I have written exclusively for this book. And I just enjoy writing strange and wonderful and wacky things.
Hi, I'm Angelina Singer. I'm the author of the Upper World series. Book 1 is The Sorting Room, and I'm mainly talking about that today because this is the one where I do some world building. My debut novel, Just Like a Pill, is more of a romance, so it's not heavy on that concept, but it's here, and it's funny and cringy and goofy and based on someone I know, whatever. So, anyway, yeah, really excited to talk about concept today and about world building and all that kind of stuff. So.
Thanks, guys. I just started, I'm a toddler in the science fiction fantasy area. I'm writing a 9-book series because I have nothing better to do. It's going to be 3 trilogies, which is known as an enealogy in the Latin. The first trilogy's out. Basically, you think and the readers think, despite hints given throughout the story, that you're in the Middle Ages, perhaps England, Scotland, Ireland. But you're not. You're actually in a scientific experiment that's occurring in the 26th century. And they're putting people into war-torn situations and spiritual crises with the thought that those that are successful are using their DNA differently than you or I are doing. And perhaps that will lead them to a genetic algorithm that brings on immortality. They can live as long as they want, but they're still greedy. They want immortality. So that's where I'm working from. I wanted to read the description of the panel, and then I'll make some forward remarks, prologue remarks, then we'll get into questions, and then we'll have a Q&A from you folks. How's that sound? Sound good? So this is from Morpheus, which is played by Lawrence Fishburne. He says, "This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more." Creating worlds within the story arc of science fiction and fantasy writing require rabbit hole innovation. It takes imagination, research, lots of reading, and a disciplined approach to fashioning believable, out of the ordinary, or even turned inside-out world building to build an environment for a saga to be told and portrayed. In this panel discussion, 3 of us, anyway, I'm moderating it, will discuss their approach to the complexity and challenge of world building. So one of the questions that I have to ask to everybody is, what is escapist literature? Because this, after all, I think is escapist literature, right? Is it also accessible and immersible? That, I think, is what determines a successful world-building situation. So while it's escapist literature, it is also accessible and immersive. I'll come back to that after these questions are asked. A.D. Jamison is a writer. He says this: world building is hardly a new concept. Long before Harry Potter, long before Star Wars, philosophers and scientists had already created the intellectual practice of world building, a kind of thought experiment in which one invents a fictional world in order to test abstract concepts. For instance, Immanuel Kant, philosopher, used world building in the late 1700s to make ethical arguments. In a famous example, he proposed that one has a moral obligation to repay loans, because if everyone chose not to repay, then the result would be a world where no one ever lent money. Scientists since then have used world building to see how natural laws might work, whether real or imaginary. For instance, what other planets might look like. By the late 1850s, a fictionalized version of this practice had split off from philosophy and the sciences, becoming science fantasy, then modern science fiction literature, resulting in works like Edwin Abbott's Flatland, a romance of many dimensions. That novel, first published in 1884, is many things, including a satire of Victorian social customs. But it also imagines different dimensions in order to demonstrate concepts of space and time, telling the story of a square that inhabits a two-dimensional world, Flatland, but winds up visiting a one-dimensional world, Lineland, then meets a sphere from a three-dimensional world, Spaceland. The physicists on the Big Bang Theory are passionate fans of sci-fi, and in that sense, little has changed since the Victorian era. There's always been a great deal of cross-pollination between science and science fiction. In his 1920 volume, Space-Time and Gravitation, Sir A.S. Editing, Plumian Professor of Astronomy and Experimental Philosophy at Cambridge, tries to explain how moving in spherical space might cause distant places to appear frozen in time. To help the reader envision this, he appeals to the fantastic world building in a 1901 story by H.G. Wells, The New Accelerator it's called, in which a fantastical drug allows a person to live and move so quickly that the rest of creation seems to crawl to a halt. Indeed, for many geeks, the whole purpose of science fiction, as well as fantasy, is the illustration and explanation of scientific and fantastical concepts. He ends with this quote: "In world building, there isn't any supernatural, not really, just a different order of the natural." So, with that as a prelude, I'm going to ask these following questions, which the panelists have been forearmed. What do you believe are the three most memorable examples of world building in science fiction and fantasy? D.R.?
I'm sorry, I could not hear you.
What do you believe are the three most memorable examples of world building in either science fiction or fantasy?
Okay, platform 9 3/4. So you have this place in a train station, and folks run up to it and they either vanish or they go and it's not something that you'd think would actually exist in the real world. So it immerses you in the world of Harry Potter because it's part of something that only they know about. And the other thing that always gets me with that is, how come regular people just don't seem to notice that folks just vanish in this one spot in the train station routinely, especially at certain times of the year? And also, she gives us a hiccup. Like, these are things the kids do every year. But she gives us a hiccup when at one point Ron and Harry cannot get through. So it isn't something where the law always applies. It's not something that's a constant. She plays with it. And I find that some of the best examples of world building are not just in how things work in the world you've built, but how do they not work? What causes them to fail? So she does go on to explain that. If you are familiar with the series, you know. But that is a very interesting instance to me because it's about how that world works. The other one I think that really stands out for me is in Star Wars, where you have Luke Skywalker, and I don't care which movies you're a fan of or not a fan of, I'm just using this to kind of illustrate a point. Luke Skywalker snaps as an adult when he's trying to teach people and he's responsible for them. He has not dealt with or unpacked any of his trauma. So now he's going to try to teach kids to be Jedi, including his own nephew, and of course he screws it up. He hasn't resolved all the issues that he had going on when he was fighting the Empire. He never once kind of acknowledges and sits down and deals with the fact that he's an orphan, that his sister had been estranged from him. He's just kind of powers through everything. And I find sometimes that when you're world building, one of the good ways to show what your world is like and how things work in your world is that your characters live in it. So you can have characters drive the way your world works and illustrate the way your world works. The Force isn't something that's as easy to control as Luke makes it seem in his first 3 movies. When he's a much older man, he actually seems to have less control of it because he has less kind of control of himself. He's not a young man anymore, and now he's feeling the aches and pains, emotional and mental as well as physical. So I find that is also a good illustrative point. And then I guess the third one for me would be in one of my own books, and it's because I've been working with this concept a lot. There's also, this goes along with the first thing I said with platform minded forms, is how things don't work. Well, how about people? What happens when people don't work? In the next book that's taking place in this world, this series is all finished, but I'm writing a new series in this world. I've got a character with a magical illness. So what happens when magic isn't beneficial? I find that when somebody thinks of magic, they think it's something that's going to make their life easier, or it's almost miraculous how it works, but it's not. It has its own set of rules, and it has its own set of ways that it is processed through whoever's using the magic. So when I've got someone with a magical malady, how does it look? How is it maybe similar or dissimilar to physical illness in our world? And what are the parallels I can draw with that? How can I make the character who's suffering from this illness feel more real so that we really understand what it's like maybe for this kid to be the one guy he knows out of everybody who's ill magically. So I think sometimes by showing how things don't work, we can immerse our readers more.
That's awesome. I think, D.R., you also touched upon that original question I asked was about escapist literature. Is it accessible and immersible? And so the strategies you used for that are, I think, pretty unique and right down the middle with science fiction and fantasy world building, because we have to do those things. Paul, want me to repeat the question?
No, I got the question.
Gotcha.
Okay, my first example is one that's known to everyone. It's Tolkien's Middle-earth. Tolkien took folklore and legend and not only brought it to life, he made it relatable. And where else are you going to find elves and dwarves that you can say, I can understand what that creature is going through. And just the land that he created and everything that he populated it with. I mean, it's an inspiration to anyone who reads and writes fantasy. Secondly, a little bit more contemporary. I have to say the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. I mean, a lot of you are familiar with that as well. Just the world that he created, the different populations, and the threat up north of the Dark One coming down. That has, I mean, the people don't even pay attention to that. They're too busy fighting amongst themselves. And that has influenced many authors, including myself. That kind of a concept where people, you know, they ignore the bigger issue to advance their own personal selfish agendas. And even in fantasy, that's a very topical, very relatable issue. For a third example, I would probably have to go to me, dystopian fiction is speculative. You can call it fantasy. The two examples that come to mind are Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's A Brave New World. Now in 1984, the population is kept in control through surveillance and fear. In Brave New World, it basically kept in control by being kept high and happy all the time. But either way, they're both insidious. They both, you know, it's a power struggle. It's people, you know, they struggle against that and they try to burst through. But it's not always easy, and it doesn't have happy endings, and, which is, you know, this world here. You know, as far as immersing and escapism, well, maybe not so much a dystopian, because maybe sometimes that rings a little bit too true today. But as long as it's relatable, as long as the characters are relatable, and then you can get emotionally invested in them, you can very well just dive into that and forget, you know, like a lot of your own issues, a lot of your own problems. There's a few minutes that you're going through the pages. So, okay.
Thanks, Paul. Angelina?
Sure. So I'd say three good examples of world building that I enjoy would be the Hunger Games, because you see the different you know, areas of Panem, and they all function differently. They all have to interact with each other to survive, basically. So it's interconnected, and it's also kind of at the mercy of you know, the city above everything else. So it's very good world building is interconnected, and it's structured in a way that's kind of built on its connection, basically, I would say. Secondly, I would say Divergent is also a great example of that, because it shows how different people have different skills and different vocations that they get pushed into, and how, again, the society functions based off of those kind of precipitating needs to belong, which sometimes, as we see in the movie, doesn't always describe everybody properly, as we see with our main characters. So that's an example. And then I would say the third is The Giver, if you guys have seen or read that. Kind of like bouncing off of what Paul had just said about how it's like, you know, people are high or they're happy or they're just not thinking about their problems. With The Giver, people's emotions are taken away through drugs. So basically they don't know what's going on, and when our main characters start to avoid those drugs and start to see what's around them and see color for the first time even, it becomes a different experience. So that's a good example of building a world where people are kind of encroached upon their freedoms, and then they kind of come out of that and you see the world differently. So those are my favorite three examples.
Thank you. I have another question related. Some of you have already referred to this, but the other question would be regarding these worlds that you brought up. What are some of your most favorite ways these settings were created?
Okay, I'll answer first. Well, going with Tolkien, I love how he used nature itself to create it. You know, like the elves land out, I forget, Rivendell. And it's in the trees, it's not constructed like this building here. It's all natural, even where the dwarves are down in their mines. It's carved out of the living rock. And I love that. I just love how you just don't work against nature, but work with it to create your own homes. And even with the contemporary, even if you go more urban, you can still take factors, and you can just run with it as far as take modern problems like crime or poverty and just put a new spin on it, and just build it up from there. I mean, that's about my best answer for that.
Thanks, Paul. D.R.?
I think that one of the coolest things about writing speculative fiction, I get people asking me this all the time. Why do you write all these magic people and these vampires? And what's up with all the werewolves and the dragons? And I say because they're parallel to stuff that I want to say about this world. So my vampires in this series, Providence Paranormal, they have a lot of restrictions on how they can be in the world. They can't bite people, they can't drink blood in public. You can walk down the street eating a sandwich and drinking a soda, right? Well, a vampire can't, even if it's a blood in a thermos, they can't walk around drinking blood out of a thermos. They're not allowed, it's against the law. And the police can and will beat them up and throw them in jail for that. So, and I think that's wrong. So I have the vampires in my books kind of keeping their heads down, and they're trying to fight for their rights, but it isn't really until other characters start getting involved who aren't vampires and speaking up for them that they start to get looked at as being maybe more than just people who drink blood, and that we should be scared of them. Because for the most part, the vampires are just people who, for whatever reason, became vampires. You know, and it all has to do with the fact that in this series, the whole world knows there's magic. The whole world knows about the vampires. They know that there's dragons. They know that there's werewolves and everything else. And when that all came out, the very old vampires who didn't want to let go of their power made a big mistake. They went around randomly turning people to build their power base back up and then make foot soldiers and fight the mortals. But it was a losing proposition. Most of those really old vampires are dead. Now there's just these people who are just regular people who are victimized. And now they have to live in this world where the law has said, oh, we don't want that happening again. So we're going to make a lot of punitive laws against these vampires so that they can't go around just turning people and, oh, drinking blood is disgusting, and like all these awful things. And I go more in depth with it after this series is over. I write another series in this world, and there's a large vampire rights movement that starts to gain momentum in the next series in that world. But the majority of vampires are just these regular people who got turned right in the 90s. And so, I mean, some of them are, you know, they're like Gen X people who are stuck being young and not wanting to be, and watching their parents get old and go to nursing homes, and they're just like, they're tearing their hair out. But I think that the ability to make parallels with stuff that we see in our world that we don't necessarily have the means to speak about in a large way, because I'm not I'm not going to go run for office somewhere, but I can sure write a book, and I can definitely illustrate what it feels like for these folks. Another thing I do is I try to make my characters feel like real people, so that when they get identified with, and you might read a book where there's, I got a perspective of a character who's a vampire, it's first person. So he's sitting there and he's worried about, he's hungry, but he can't go into a place and get something to eat. He's got to go all the way back home. So it inconveniences him in ways that maybe we don't think about. And I like to get people to be immersed and care about a character and then think, oh wow, what is this like to have to deal with this? And we deal on a nightly for the vampire basis. But that there are also people in our world who mundanely have to deal with very similar problems. So I like to put those things that I have to say in the books in a fantasy way, because I find people can identify with it a little more, and maybe I'll reach people that otherwise wouldn't even think of that. It wouldn't occur.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. What are your favorite ways these settings were created?
Okay, yeah, just going back to what I said about Divergent and Hunger Games and The Giver and all that. I enjoy when dystopian world building is created through taking something, D.R. kind of mentioned this with her idea of taking stuff that really happens in the world and kind of flipping it into a narrative. And I think that the best kinds of world building happen when they take something real or a problem that exists and then you just change it enough to make it interesting to fit your story. And then maybe you can get people to rally around a cause through seeing it in a very exaggerated format. So my books don't do that. This is a very fun, imaginative story. I'm not actually trying to accomplish anything through this specifically in the real life aspect. But I think what my books could potentially teach somebody is empathy, because you don't know where people come from, you don't know their story, you don't know what their background is. So maybe that's the cause. Maybe good dystopian world building is just teaching kindness in a way that people might not normally experience, I would say.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, are you a planner or a pantser? Planner being you outline everything, you create it, the world structure before you start writing the story. Pantser is you fly by the seat of your pants. Where do you, along that line, say, where do you find yourself? D.R.?
Well, I like to call myself a planter because I do a little of both. So basically what I do is I have certain seeds and I put them in the soil. And it might be a character, it might be a setting, it might be like a way of power works. And those things I planned out and I write them out and I detail them. The most common thing I do is make a character and what that character kind of is about. And then I put them together and I sort of see what happens. There's a lot of, some people outline and they'll go chapter by chapter what's going to happen in their book. I don't do that kind of planning, but I'll say, oh, I've got this character named Lynn Frampton and she's a super genius, but she's got no magical powers, but she got accepted into this supernatural school anyway. So now she's going to get there and let's see what happens. And then who is she going to meet? Okay, well, she's going to meet this brainiac dragon who thinks he's better than everyone else and they're going to butt heads. I know they're going to butt heads, so I write a scene with them and they argue and then I go, oh, that's going to go in the book somewhere, right? And then I might say, oh, I've got this character and she has a power called umbral magic and her type comes with umbral affinity. It makes people forget her. So how does she deal with being forgotten every time? And every single time she walks up to her friend and go, hey, how you doing? They go, who are you again? And she has to remind them. So she has what she calls the reruns. So I had to build that. I built that character kind of based around her power. And then I put her in the scene with another character and see what happens. And then I go from there and I go, okay, so this is going to happen here, this is going to happen there, and then I connect the dots. So, you know, the world gets built based on the characters and the themes that I'm trying to make with the powers, the characters, and the setting. Everything's Rhode Island in here. I have one guy, I was going to have him go get hot wieners, so I wrote a whole scene about that, and that scene happens in book 8 in this series, but I wrote it before I wrote book 1, so there you go.
Okay, what D.R. said. Actually, again, like D.R. said, I do a little of both. I've got the idea for a story, I got the outline, the skeleton, and as I'm writing it, I flesh it out, and it gets to the point quite often where I'll get to a certain scene, I'll get to a certain character, and I realize that what I planned earlier is not going to work. Okay, I've got to go back, edit and change. So to me, if I try to plan it all out on a strict scale, it's not going to work because I know as I'm writing it, it's going to say, that's horrible, that's awful. I gotta change that. So pantsing is an integral part. I mean, I know the general plot line, I know the motivations of the characters, and I'm not pretty sure the ending. Not always, but pretty sure. That could change too. So that's how it is. I got a framework, and then I work in that framework, and I change that framework, and I change it again, and I change it again. And finally I've got something that, okay, I'll stand up. And that's how I come up with my books and stories.
Yeah, I'm definitely a pantser. I don't do a lot of plotting. I did, for the sequel, I did a little bit just because at that point I had like 3 or 4 different storylines going. I need to keep track of like, hey, who said what in the first book. So I definitely like had to do that visually for myself just to go forward and be able to keep things consistent. But other than that, I just think of a concept and I, throw down a couple characters and then start to expand. I might add characters that will butt heads like D.R. was talking about. I might add characters that are love interests. I might add friendship like characters and that kind of dynamic. So it just depends. I'll start with an idea and just chase it and then embellish it kind of as I go. So by the time I'm done, I don't really know where I end up until it's over. I kind of just let it happen. So kind of messy, kind of organic, but I like doing it that way. So, which is ironic because I'm the most organized type A person ever. So I don't know why I'm like that, but just the way it is. So.
Next question is, do you use any other sources to help inspire the world you build, such as mythologies, religions, movies, or historical records? Angelina?
I haven't really done that. It's a lame answer to that good question, but I do enjoy like Latin roots, if that counts. Like for naming characters, I've done a little bit of that. I'll look up like a name or a style, and then what's a Latin word for that, and then I'll maybe use it or change it just a little bit to fit my story. A really good friend of mine actually started doing that, user writer, and I'm like, oh, that's really smart, and I liked that kind of very subtle way to hint at a theme or an idea without being too overt about it. So I started using Latin, if that counts, but not like in a linguistic format really, it's just for names or ideas.
Yes, I very much do use, I try to incorporate mythology and religion. I find that so fascinating. Just, to me, religion, as much as it can divide people, the way it's come up through humanity over thousands of years, it's incredible. It's almost like an art form unto itself. And I don't just use the contemporary Christian Judean mythology. I try to also go towards Indo-European, ancient Indo-European, Mithraic, Far East Asian, even the Polynesian islands. I try to dive into all of them, just see what they might have in common, and just see what values they push. And I very much incorporate this in my stories because I find that just so fascinating. So yeah, the answer to this question is yes, very much so.
I have so it doesn't always come out, but I do build things out of mythology. I have my vampires have, in this series, this is set in a different world from the other one, but my vampires have an ancient Egyptian root. So they come from there and they've mingled with other ancient cultures. So there are lines of vampires who are descended from Greek oracles. There are some who work for different deities in the Greek pantheon. I have one vampire is a servant of Nemezine. She's a titan. She's a memory-based. And I have some folks in here who are alchemists, and they're Jewish, and so they use a very Kabbalistic sort of approach to their alchemy. Then in here, I also have I have Baba Yaga. One of my characters is a servant of Baba Yaga, and sometimes her avatar. And she is a 14-year-old girl who is just starting high school, and she's got this charm bracelet that lets Baba Yaga kind of inhabit her body when she feels like it. So you can imagine things are a little difficult for her. And she's got that chicken hut and everything with the chicken feet, and she brews really gross stews and teas in her hut. And she won't come out. She's agoraphobic, so that's why she needs an avatar. And then in this series here, this takes place in Prohibition. So I did a lot of research and drawing off of Prohibition and mafia culture. are monsters and there are magic users, and they both have a different origin. And the monsters come from the flood, Noah's Ark flood. But the magicians all got their powers from Prometheus. I don't get into that in this book, and maybe it's a little bit spoilery, but the third book that's coming this summer is going to really kind of get more into that. So I do definitely like adding things. Oh, I've got these 3 mystic birds in this series too. They're the Mayan, the Alchemist, and the Siren, and they're all from Eastern European mythology. So I do kind of draw widely from it. Some of it is where I come from, because I'm mostly Polish and Jewish, and so some of that just comes from my own folklore, the stories I heard growing up. And other stuff just comes from things that I learned about in school or from friends, and I thought they were neat. And I just went and explored and asked a lot of questions. If you are going to use something, make sure and ask plenty of questions, because it might not fit as well as you think it does, but sometimes it fits even better than you could have imagined, but you didn't have the whole picture and you want to do it justice. So.
Time's getting on, so I'd like to do a Q&A from you. If you guys have any questions, there's a mic right there. Don't be shy.
How long have you guys been writing for?
Okay, so I'll start. I've been, ever since like middle school, I used to, you write an essay for a teacher and they'll have you do second draft. My 6th grade teacher, I'll never forget, she said, no, you're good, this is fine, you don't have to do a second draft. And when you're that young and you hear that, you're kind of like, oh, so everyone else in the class has to, but I don't? All right. So then as you get older, you start to think, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I have some kind of a natural inclination toward it. So from there, I just noticed that, through high school and college, I had a really easy time writing. I could write a 6-page literary analysis of a book within like 2 hours. So, I just started to chase it, and then I published my very first book my freshman year of college. So, and then from there, just haven't stopped. So, I guess professionally for me, it's been like 4 years, but really my whole life it's been super easy. So, that's where I'm at. Yeah.
I've been writing off and on for most of my life. I started out early in my teenage years, just fooling around, just having fun. And as I got older, I got married, I had kids, I bought a house, and life just kind of took over for a number of years. So I really couldn't get much time. But now, my kids are grown, they're going to college. And I got more free time. So within the past 10 years, I've started to write more seriously. And these 2 books here, this was published in 2016, this was in 2017. And in early 2020, they are going to be reissued. And my collection of short stories was published just last year. I've had a number of stories published in various magazines. And now I'm just trying to dedicate more time to it. Life still gets in the way quite often. I know what I want to do, and I know what I enjoy doing. And if other people read it and enjoy it, it's all worth it.
So somebody gave me a typewriter when I was 9 years old for my birthday, and I sat down and I wrote a very juvenile episode of Star Trek, the original series, about a food fight due to a malfunctioning food processor. And ever since then, I've been writing stories down instead of just telling them to my friends. When I was in middle school, I was writing in a notebook after we were done working on our assignments instead of just sitting there like we were supposed to do. And the substitute teacher grabbed the notebook off my desk, went up to the front of the class and started reading out of it, thinking she'd embarrass me. Well, everybody else in the class liked it. So, after that I had a little bit of an easier time at that school until we moved, but it was good. And I kind of, and then I got angsty when I was a teenager, and it was pretty lame. And I started writing kind of emo poetry before emo was really a thing, because I'm 45. So I mean, goth was a thing, but I really didn't know about it. And I wrote a lot of angsty poetry. I stopped writing for a while because life happened, and but I kept thinking of stories, kept making up stories, I kept reading. It's a lot of reading to write. And finally, I wrote a short story. I took as an elective. I took a creative writing course when I went back to college in my 30s. And then I said, hey, you know what? I want to do this. I don't want to just write this as a short story. I want to write it as a novel. And it grew into the first book of this series. And ever since then, I've kind of been. So I mean, probably what is that? I think that was 2010. And that's kind of been my current crop of books that I have going now. I published in 2016, and it was the first book in this series right here. And I got picked up by a publisher this summer. Even though I self-published, you can still get picked up by publishers. So don't let anybody tell you that that can't happen. You just have to keep at it.
I started playing the classical guitar when I was 4. So my whole sense of being was surrounded in music and sound and rhythm. And I studied with a man in Fall River, Massachusetts, whose name was Joseph Raposo. His son was Joe Raposo Jr., who was the music director for Sesame Street. Joe and I would sit at Maestro Raposo's feet, literally, and learn from him. So I started composing music when I was around 8. And in high school, that led into poetry. So I'm 71 and a half today. I started getting very seriously involved in writing short stories, didn't do anything with it. And it's only about 2014 I wrote this long poem. It was a homage to my parents' generation, World War II generation. It's basically off the novel Hunting Eichmann, and about prejudice, racism, and stereotyping, and the dangers of that. So it's a 7-page poem, but there's 75 pages of annotation with it, including photographs that are very rare. I think there's only 135 photographs of, you actually see the German Nazi officers separating people out in railroad cars at Auschwitz, and they are making people laugh as they are making decisions of this person's going to go into the gas chambers, and in the background you see 3 gas chambers operating. When I finished that poem, I decided it was time to write a novel, and I started writing this series. So my writing, I guess, would say it's heavily influenced, I think when you read it, by music, by poetic lyricism. I don't know if I achieve it. I strive to do so. I think it's 1:45. I encourage you people to, first off, thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed the panel discussion, but I strongly recommend and encourage that you go to these 3 people, their booths. What table are you at, D.R.?
I'm in 609. Yeah, 609. It's that last row, and I'm facing the back of the building. And I'm on a corner. There's this huge banner that's got this lady on it. Kind of cute.
I'm at table 406. It's right on the aisle. You can't miss this hat.
I believe it's 417. I'm literally the other side, that I'm close to the sidewall, and I'm like, it's one from the end. So basically, yeah, it's like over there, go to the wall, and you'll see my crazy hair. So.
I also encourage you to check their websites out, and the material they have. They're fantastic writers and creators. At 716. If you want to drop by, I'll be glad to take your name and email address. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the panel discussion.